Hey everybody, welcome. Today we're talking about also a very, very important topic. Often the reason why a lot of people stop singing is because they experience a lot of tension. And so it's actually a really tricky topic to discuss, but I think really, really important um, for beginners, for professionals. It's just surprising how much tension we can accumulate when we're singing and just performing in general. This is all about tension release strategies. Often, tension is what holds back our range when we're doing things improperly with our voice. We accumulate this tension that causes a lot of the issues that we have. When we learn to fix the tension or address the tension, we actually often learn to open up our voice. And so that's where a lot of our barriers are. And so we're going to talk about some different strategies, sort of a model you can use, and it's something that involves the mind body connection. So it's we're going to kind of approach it from a lot of different angles because it's really easy to get discouraged in this process. We'll talk about sort of some of the vicious cycles that we can get into. So that's sort of the idea. Hi, welcome. Good to see some familiar profile names. Let's kind of dive into this. I actually spent a little bit of time talking with an integrative health specialist. Just I have a bunch of friends in my sort of community that are medical professionals. And so I kind of wanted to share a little bit of a certain process that I think can be really helpful when we're talking about chronic tension, pain issues, and just sort of how singing can be an awareness activity for all of that kind of stuff. And ultimately, it can apply to a lot of different sort of performance situations. Singing is just inherently very vulnerable. And so we get a lot of tension that sort of comes from it, sometimes because of emotional things, sometimes because of what we're doing with our physical technique. Um, Singing is hard, particularly because of some of these reasons, I think, where tension can really discourage you, set you back. But I do think that dealing with this kind of stuff and working with it through your singing practice can help you with a number of different things. And actually, like with a lot of my students, where we've addressed some different sort of tension habits, uh, they found that it's just they're noticing it throughout the day when they do all sorts of things, and it helped them sort of kind of just rewire things, be more aware, and becomes more of like a lifestyle thing. And you realize like you're accumulating a lot of tension, even just throughout the day when you're doing other stuff. And just like you're mentioning here, some of it is like inherent in the practice of conditioning and stretching your muscles. Hi, welcome. It's good to see people from all around the globe coming and checking in with this kind of stuff. I really love seeing that. So let's just talk a little bit about so when we're conditioning our voice, just like being an athlete, like we're going to accumulate some fatigue. Um, and that's okay. If your computer shuts down, like this will all be recorded and you can always come back to this. Um, and you'll find, actually, when you are relaxed as you're singing, the whole process gets a lot easier. But that's a really frustrating thing. And it can happen, to say to someone. And it can happen often that like a teacher can just be like, you just need to relax while you sing. And that sometimes is discouraging. Like there's something wrong with you, or you're inherently stressed out person, and that's why your voice isn't working. So let's talk about just some of these strategies and sort of a method of approaching tension. And this comes from just some of the conversations that I've had with some of these integrative health people, and also like my practice as a vocalist and working with lots of different students. So the first thing we want to talk about is awareness. Then we're going to talk about triggers, and then how we actually address our tension with sort of like exercises and different things we can do, particular to the voice. And then we talk about sort of integrating all of that, and then ultimately just rest and recovery. Um, so let's start with awareness. This is ultimately kind of the most important aspect. Oftentimes just having awareness over our tension and where it's happening is the route to figuring out all the other things. But I think it's really important to address and become aware of tension from a place of non-judgment. So this is probably one of the hardest things to do, is just to notice tension without without blaming yourself for it, right? Or sort of getting um, in a mindset that's sort of fixed about it. Like there's something wrong with what you're doing. There's all sorts of reasons why tension can accumulate, and it's not always about sort of like mistakes that you're making. So I think changing that mentality first and foremost is really helpful. You can check out how much my lessons cost on our website, on my website. So just take a look at all of that. Um, so yeah, let's talk about this sort of awareness thing. So I really like to use biofeedback, and sort of this is sort of a play on that term because we just have a lot of natural ability to be aware of our tension using our hands, visual cues like looking in a mirror. So I highly recommend that you do that. And obviously, just sort of taking time to slow down and pay attention to how different things feel when you're doing your exercises. So I'm often throughout my practice sort of putting my hands in different places, my lower abdominal support, feeling this sort of upper ab area. We're going to talk about that. Sometimes it gets very, very rigid. Shoulders, the head and the neck, the jaw, the tongue, you name it. Like you can just accumulate tension in all sorts of places. And it can be kind of like a game of whack-a-mole where you're sort of chasing your tension around. Sometimes people kind of grip their fist or they curl their toes while they're performing. We can hide it very easily. So we're going to go through that sort of process of just what it sort of means to get good awareness over sort of where your tension things are happening. I also highly recommend, like for any of my sort of vocal practices, I always start with a little bit of stretching or using like a self-care tool. So this is a kind of an example of something you can use, and you can sort of like gently kind of squeeze in different areas. So that one's can be really nice. Often when you're doing this, you put it in a spot and then you kind of move your head and your neck around it. And so you can get some sensation of that and just sort of work out the muscles. Before I start singing, I always take a moment and do some head and neck rolls. And, one thing that people forget about is actually working with your lower back. So when our spine tends to be out of alignment, we tend to have trouble regulating our pressure, getting good quality resonance, and so we want to just do the best we can. I have some students who are like, "Well, I have scoliosis, so what does that mean? Like, does that mean I can't sing?" And that's not true. It's just we want to find an optimal position for whatever is going on with our body, and just try to find balance between our lower body and our upper body, lower spine and upper spine. So it's not that it has to be in a perfect, correct position, but that we have to be aware about how these two sort of parts of our body are always finding sort of a balanced state. Um, another tool that I like to use sometimes, I'm kind of pulling out some generic ones, is this sort of weird cane-like thing, which you wouldn't think of, but this is really great for a huge sort of tension spot that we get sometimes, which is right here in our shoulders. And so I'll take this kind of a thing, and you just sort of gently push down with it. A lot of these self-care tools take your own sort of exploration to make sense of what feels good for you. And it just kind of helps me be a little bit more aware actually of sort of where things hurt a little bit, where they're riding up, all of that kind of stuff. So I highly recommend doing that. There's also cranial sacral sort of tools that help us with our spinal alignment. So you can get like these cranial headrests that you just sort of passively lay in, and that helps us get a little bit of separation back here behind our head. This area, as we know, when we sing, as one of the compensating things that happens when our voice isn't quite in balance, is our head and our neck and our jaw sort of comes out like this, and it creates a lot of tension back here. So even if you don't have self-care tools, you can actually do this kind of a thing. So you get like you're going in sort of a headrest position, and you use your thumbs to kind of gently Massage down this area and massage the back of your head, like the spot right where your spine and your head meet. We can hold a lot of tension there, especially as singers. So give yourself some time to squeeze these areas, especially throughout your practice. Yeah, so that's part of it. And then another thing that you can do, and of course, be very, very careful with this. Don't wrench at it, but there are these principles of doing a self laryngeal massage. Sometimes we think we can't really work this area because it sort of feels a little precious. But if you can't really talk as you do this, you're going to naturally, as you start to move your larynx a little bit and massage this area, you'll notice that your jaw and your tongue has to actually relax a bit. So I'll do this and just gently move that area around a bit. You might notice that you get some little like crackles, little sort of grating kinds of sensations. Don't wrench at it, but you can actually gently sort of feel out where some of these muscles around our larynx are getting pretty tight and start to massage that. So I will do that often. And one area that gets really tight in particular from a lot of throat clearing is our cough reflex, which is like right down here underneath our larynx. Be careful not to also press that too hard because it'll literally send you into a coughing fit. If you've ever had someone like give you a massage and pull that area a little too taut, it makes you start coughing. So what you can do is you can actually sort of relax this area by gently massaging it. If you're someone who's been coughing a lot, this area just gets like hyper excited. And so little tiny things can send you into a coughing fit. Like, I don't know if you've recovered from being sick and you start to sing and you feel like you can't really take these full breaths, because if you do, it's going to make you start coughing. You might want to do a little bit of this kind of work, and also some steam showers, things that help you start to kind of hydrate and relax this area. So we all have to find our own kinds of routines, and that's the thing with in general with sort of preparing your body. uh, but I find that that sort of process and stretching and using these tools helps me start to just be a little more aware of where I'm accumulating tension. Um, so that's the first thing, right? Is starting to just become aware of your body, where things are getting really tight and you're losing mobility, and that comes through just sort of testing it all out, right? So doing a stretch routine, using your self care tools before you start singing, and even afterwards too, right? Giving yourself some time to recalibrate and reset. I find it so helpful sometimes after a show to lay in like one of those headrest things and allow my body just to sort of let go, and reset, because you'll carry that stuff with you into the next practice and the next practice if you don't sort of address it. Um, so that's sort of this awareness thing. Often, like, a teacher can really help you also gain some awareness of where you might be holding tension based on the particular sounds that are made, right? Like if you've got like a froggier kind of sound and you're, oh, the tongue is often pulling back and squeezing this way. If you got a lot of twang in your head and your neck and your jaws coming forward like that, right, it means that there's some tension back here. Sometimes if you're feeling like you're squeezing air out a lot, it can mean that there's some tension here and that you're holding. And just remember that there's various reasons why we accumulate tension. Sometimes it's from our voice, sometimes it's from other things. And this leads me to step two, which is discovering your triggers. So, and we're going to get into exercises and things that are going to help with these things. But I just want to point out that I'm doing this process because we can get in this vicious cycle where we're obsessing over our tension. So I don't know if this has happened to you before. I find that I'm sort of doing this delicate dance with students a lot. Like if you're like, oh, here's the tension point, and this is happening to you here, and you start to hyperfixate on it, it actually kind of makes it worse sometimes, because all you're thinking about is that tension, and you're saying, okay, keep my tongue relaxed, don't let the tongue engage. And then you're doing that right before you sing a high note or something like that. And then it's probably going to happen because you're so focused on it. So it's how we are aware, not discouraged, not in a judgmental place, and then paying attention to where it's happening And noting those moments can be really helpful because it can allow you to sort of work around um, these sort of things. So I find sometimes like when we're learning new music, when we're um, reading music, we sometimes develop a lot of tension because we're just naturally unsure of where we're going, right? So that's one thing. Um, the obvious one is when we're performing, right? We tend to generate a lot of tension because we're nervous, and because when we're nervous, we tend to want to protect our body, and so things start to kind of hold and grip. And so, one of the best things you can do when you're sort of nervous and you're getting up in front of people for the first time, or it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's like hits you at random times. Even professional singers, right? We constantly are dealing with nerves. There's all sorts of anecdotal stories of famous singers and performers who have dealt with nerves throughout their entire life. And sometimes the more successful you get, the more nervous you can get because you're kind of setting this standard and this bar higher and higher. So, um, one thing you can do is just acknowledge it, take a moment, shake it out. Those kinds of things like can really just help you sort of um, break the cycle. Where the more you try to sort of keep it hidden and sort of avoid it, the more that this kind of happens. So I'm talking about sort of performance anxieties and these things, right? Can build a lot of tension into our body. Um, so triggers for tension can be physical things you're doing, right? High notes in a song, one obvious thing. Sometimes it's singing really low notes too, and we're putting too much energy into them, and that causes some tension. Uh, and then ultimately, right, it can be emotional things that are happening, right? Am I not feeling comfortable? Am I feeling stressed out in a situation? And starting to note what your body is doing, right? So this step one and step two work together. Um, like this is this concept, right? So like your awareness of what your body is feeling like, and then noting the context of the situation that you're starting to develop that tension. That's really important. That's why I try to develop a practice where just trying to get people comfortable, trying to get myself comfortable so that we can actually get some quality practice with our voice. And that requires first taking some time to set things to slow down before you start doing like drills where you're actually conditioning your voice, right? That's where we also develop a lot of tension. So if you're not doing sort of vocal stretching exercises, you're going to find that you're just sort of building more and more of that habit. And so one really important one that I'll do often is it seems simple, but working on humming allows you to take a moment to be a little more aware of certain things with your body. And I'll show you with some biofeedback. Um, it's not the exercise as much as what you're doing in the exercise and the awareness that you're sort of gaining. So we reduce down sort of the complexity of what's happening. Also, I'll start with the hum and I'll go like, what you might notice is the second you start trying to hum, you might find that, oh, my shoulders are rising up like this, and I need to sink them back down. Oh, I'm gripping onto something. Or the second I start moving my head as I'm doing this exercise, I'll note that maybe I'm getting kind of two-dimensional and sort of locked in place, right? Like, so going like, and then you'll notice the second you move that it's actually a little tight or a little rigid. So it's not that there's like a perfect posture for singing, but it's actually our ability to stay flexible and able to sort of swivel around our center that gives us ultimately our most ease when we're doing this. So again, humming also just naturally, when we do this, it creates good sort of inertance or back pressure with our resonance, helps us find good breath support and the balance between the two. It's low in our register, so we don't have to work too hard. And I'm just trying to find more of an automatic sort of place. So I'm going like this, like sinking in and I'm moving the resonance around by moving my tongue up and down, by moving my jaw a little bit. Sometimes when we think about, oh, we just have to have this open space, that can actually accumulate a lot of tension when we're like trying to hold a space. So allow yourself to collapse the space and open it and kind of go back and forth. So again, where I'm like, A lot of the tension is when we are locked in place or more rigid. Um, and then I go through my vowel shapes without even going up in pitch. And this helps me feel like what vowel shapes are maybe holding more tension than others. So where does it get kind of stuck and hard to sort of move out of? So I'll go like, a lot of people find that the higher, more narrow vowel shape, like E, can get kind of tight. So if you're like E, allow yourself to move things while you're singing, even if it makes kind of a silly sound. Um, you'll start to notice how intricately connected our entire body is when we're singing. So like, I don't know if you've tried to do this, but even just like tapping on your chest while you sing, and you'll notice that it changes the sound, right? So if I'm like, right, it started, you hear that sort of little pulsing. So you can see when you're rigid, it's actually changing the quality a little bit of our sound, and starting to get things sort of tight. So our shoulders and all this stuff plays a role. And I just try to see if I can move this stuff gently without wrenching it around, and see if my voice can stay a little more consistent without these things trying to brace. So like, that's why I do that sort of work. It's actually just to sort of, it's almost like echolocation. We're becoming more aware of just, what's happening in the moment, right? And that's really, really important. Um, so that's this sort of idea, and then we can start to go into specific things with our body. So like the jaw, we should be able to allow our jaw to relax and be flexible while we're singing. So you might notice like, yeah, it's really tight like that versus we actually want this to stay relatively loose. One thing specifically also about the jaw, just to talk about, is a lot of times people try to just drop it straight down, like that. If this sort of is popping out, it's over engaged. And we actually want to think of our jaw as more of a swivel. So like it just falls down and back, and it doesn't actually need to take that much space. I remember this speech pathologist spoke to me about how we're kind of built more like alligators. We have all these muscles to collapse our jaw and kind of clench it, and chewing, right? All of these things that are useful for our body. And we have way less muscles for opening our jaw. So you don't need to think of like trying to hold your jaw open. It actually, like, those muscles aren't very good at that. So instead, just letting it hang and letting it be soft. So every once in a while as I'm singing, I'll be like, and I just want to gently see if it's loose and flexible. And we'll talk about using some glides and some other things, like a W can be very helpful as a sound. Um, for getting our jaw to relax. So that's one thing. The other one, just sort of finding these sort of moments and places of tension, is our tongue. So underneath here, right under the jaw in this sort of fleshy area, you can often feel if your tongue is bracing or pushing against your teeth, and that can be a certain kind of tension that we have. And you just want to see if that area is soft as well. I often use going from like a bright to or like a more narrow spread vowel to a rounder, kind of taller vowel, to help sort of expose this. When we try to go for like these rounder, like O's and Oo's, sometimes our tongue tries to curl and sort of pull back and creates that froggy sound. So I'll do like oh or a o a o a o a e, these kinds of things. And then I'm checking under here to see if it's hard. And so often just bringing people this awareness that you can feel for some tongue tension under here can really, really help you just start to build that awareness, start to notice when and where it's happening with our triggers, and then actually address it, often just by gently wiggling it and doing these kinds of exercises. So simple one is just going like, way, oh, tight, you're gonna feel resistance. That's I'm pushing against it versus you'll notice even just gently moving that affects the tone a little bit. So this is why we can get in sort of this vicious sort of place, right? Like our emotions, what we're doing with our technique, if we're trying to hold or overly control something and overly think about it, actually really affects the timbre and sound quality. So I'm just trying to get this kind of floppy. Think of your tongue kind of draped over your bottom teeth here. And you can do these kinds of exercises. So I could make it a little harder and be like, trying to keep that just nice and floppy. So really using your hands and allowing this to sort of guide you. And again, moving your head and your neck around as you're doing it. All of these things are really helpful. So again, I can go like, and this brings me back to this thought about our first step about awareness and non-judgment. Um, we often want to change things sort of right away, and really you just have to sort of sit with it and think about like your first part of your practice as more of stretching and not really worrying so much about the sound quality. So sometimes we get a lot of tension because we're trying to make a perfect sound right away and not treating our body in sort of like we're an athlete. Like before we start doing our in sort of perfected motions, we have to loosen things up and wiggle them around. And with our voice, that means actually making some kind of weird sounds. So again, if this might feel really weird to kind of have this sort of relaxed, kind of almost like lispy sound, that's going to help you start to detach from some of the excess tension. And then from there, you can start to sculpt things and find sort of the right kind of quality of sound that you want. But you're going to have to first allow yourself to just sort of move a little more freely. So, like, so I really recommend this. A lot of my singing colleagues, when they're like really trying to figure out their voice in college and these kinds of things, we just kind of be moving all around the room, just trying to sort of get out of our own heads a little bit, right? So it brings me this concept of a lot of our triggers are mental and they are this weird sort of muscle memory hybrid. We save the feeling of what we did before, and it's really hard to break out of it until you start to get sort of a new muscle memory. Um, there's this school of thought for this technique called the Alexander technique, which I was actually lucky to be able to have some classes through school. They were discounted and that kind of stuff, and have like a real professional, Alexander professional, sort of work with me and sort of teach me that process a bit. I'm not trained in it, so I don't do that myself because it's kind of actually a rigorous process that they go through. But I can explain a little bit about what that Alexander technique is sort of talking about, which is that our body gets used to whatever we're doing and tries to find sort of consistency with it. So like we might feel like our body is really straight or things are going well, and then you look in a mirror and realize that you're actually kind of crooked and your body's gotten used to that and sort of adjusted. And so we often need that sort of visual cue, biofeedback to really catch when we're holding tension. And they'll often, an Alexander technique or technician will gently sort of move your head and your neck around and teach you how to do basic things like sitting, standing, crawling, walking, and just help guide you sort of into a more sort of efficient, sort of effortless place. Because we get kind of stuck in these patterns, and so that's why this practice is kind of like this: is how do you break those patterns? Give yourself sort of the ability to move freely, sometimes when we're on stage, we feel like we can't move organically. So we get kind of rigid. Alexander technique was originally created for actors, but it translates very well to singers. Because I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but if you're on stage, simple things like walking across the room or sitting down, even just sitting on stage, not doing anything while other people are performing, and like maybe you're on like a jumbotron or that kind of stuff, it can make you pretty tense, and it can feel very hard to just be natural in those positions. And so that's what a lot of this process is about, is just getting comfortable on stage, giving yourself the freedom to move a little bit, to shake your body out, and doing that in your practice so you can save the feeling, and then reproduce it when you're on stage. So that's part of this. Um, and then this, I'll get to kind of like one thing that I do often, which is this concept of how, okay, like once we've addressed certain things, like I have jaw tension, or there's specific things with like chord compression and head voice. If I'm like singing in head voice and all the air is escaping, our muscles try to squeeze to hold it in place. So we can do specific exercises like, gee, 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 with the G sound to help us sort of feel the right chord compression. It relaxes some tension, but ultimately we can't do those things when we're actually performing or singing a lot of the time. So how do we integrate sort of our awareness of tension, our triggers, and then what we are doing to sort of address the tension? How do we integrate that into our just singing? Because when we think too technically, sometimes we're very robotic, and that's not what we want when we're actually singing on stage. We want to have sort of everything be a fluid sort of motion, and so this leads me to this next concept, which is the integration thing, sort of reconnecting when you have tension to the full system. So I often will use like glides, like wah and yaw, to start feeling this. And when you start noticing all these moments in between words, and in particular things in hard passages in songs, where you actually have these glides, it helps you find a smooth sort of landing into a vowel shape so you don't get really stuck. So like the idea is again like ya goes through e, a, and ah, and then we can hold on that nice sort of ah shape. It can also be like yeah and go to like an a vowel. And then we have wa with our oo, o, ah, and that's with the lips here. And we find a more fluid motion that allows us to sort of just land in a position. So this is why I do some exercises like this. It's kind of around tension release. Also helps us with mixing when we get to that concept. But I'm going like ya, and just sort of dropping into it, right? Like wah, ya, wah, wah, wah. So I can just let it kind of hang there. Because again, our jaw, when we try to like hold it in a position, we often develop a lot of tension. So I'm doing this kind of thing. And then you can actually do some stuff with your hands. You'll notice that like a lot of singers will do things with their hands as they're singing. And that's part of this sort of integration concept. We're trying to make everything a fluid motion. So when I'm like, wah, yeah. And be mindful again here that we're still, when we're talking about tension release, you want to allow your voice to do whatever it's going to do. And sometimes you might find that it starts to kind of do this jittery kind of thing. That's part of sort of letting the body take over. So any sort of twitching, like sometimes people's like lips start to twitch or the jaw a little bit, or you'll feel like your support kind of doing that sort of jittery thing. Let that happen. It'll help sort of the body regulate. I always think of like a balance based sport where if you get on like a balance board or like a slack line, your body starts doing this weird thing because it's trying to find balance. So that's actually part of the process of releasing the tension and go towards the instability of it. So like, yeah, wah. It's letting your body sort of be sung rather than the other way around, which you're thinking about. I'm gonna like do something and I'm gonna make it really active. Ultimately, a lot of our voice is more on the sort of subconscious, slightly passive sort of area. It's sort of between the two. So we do our practice so that we don't have to think about it when we're performing as much. And we can feel more of this sort of fluid integration, which can be kind of disconcerting. It can feel like so effortless sometimes that you're like, am I even doing anything? And then often we try to do something, it pulls us out of the zone, and then we start to get kind of locked in place. Um, again, ask me questions if this is hard to follow, but this is, I think, a lot of the real answer of how this works, right? We address specific things, tension points in our practice, and then we want to allow our body to just naturally do what it's going to do when we're performing, and trust our muscle memory. It's just sort of how the body works. Um, Explore this sort of feeling of like, I'll often get people to bend their knees, drop their hands as they're about to sing something. It just sort of resets you so that you're not fixed, right? So you're not like, yeah, right? Yeah. So the idea is you give yourself a job, so that you can kind of almost like trick yourself, right? So that you end up doing the thing uh, more naturally without sort of trying to be so consciously fixed on it. Again, this is what's so tricky about tension. And this is why I wanted to discuss this just as a slightly different pattern. Sometimes in tension release, I talk about like misuse and overuse and abuse of the voice and how these things kind of mess with our vocal health, how we accumulate tension that way. Or, I'll be like very particular about like, here's a bunch of exercises to relax your tongue, or a bunch of exercises or a flow for your jaw or your breath. All of these sort of practices and all the content is geared around finding efficiency and eliminating excess vocal tension, right? So inefficient voices are going to get fatigued much faster because of all this accumulation of tension. Uh, this is for like the troubleshooting for the singer that a student that I often kind of will find with a lot of people and come across, and that's this sort of vicious cycle that happens, right? Where you have certain tension patterns and they become very, very ingrained because you're so focused on them. And so we have to do all these kinds of workarounds. And part of it is just like what one of you all mentioned, which is just the consistency of it, right? Not trying to spend like 3 hours practicing in one day to eliminate one problem with your voice. It doesn't really work that way. You have to do a whole host of exercises so that you can slowly condition and stretch your voice so that it's more and more receptive to you, and I'll give it some time to recover. And we'll talk about that in a second. So again, this practice is to do glides like ya, wa, and allow yourself to drop. Another thing that I'll talk about is letting some air out before you start singing, especially with these shorter phrases. That allows us to drop down into our body a little lower. When we breathe and we sing from this sort of raised place, you can see all these things start to kind of ride up. And they start to block this area. I remember one really important fact that kind of changed the way I thought about the voice, and particularly why I'm sort of teaching this way today, is that all the muscles around here, like our scalene, the muscles around our neck here that attach to our shoulder, sternocleidomastoid area, they only constrict. So you can't like consciously try to open or relax the muscles by like making them do something. So this is why it's a little bit more of a mental thing. You can give them a job so that they can set, and then try to catch yourself singing when they're all just sort of relaxed and hanging out there. So these all just constrict. So you want to just test them and yeah. And we want to make sure that our breath drops low enough so that these things can slide out of the way, right? So imagine like your shoulder is like a coat hanger, right? It's just kind of hanging there on both your shoulders, and they're sliding back, and then yeah, one, and start to pay attention to things that are happening, right? As you start to relax one thing, you get your breath down, you might notice that your tongue tries to pull back and make things happen. So, yeah, whoa. I'll even just gently kind of wiggle that around. You can do this with so many different exercises, right? You could do something a little harder and be like, ay, 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 ay. So often where the tension's going to happen is in anticipation of that high note. You might even start at the very first note and be like, Hi, ya, 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 right, or ya, do like a little flinch. It's surprising how often this happens for all of us. So watch yourself in a mirror and see if you can just kind of hang out and be like, hi, ya, 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 ya. Send the breath down. If anything, allow your body to do this sort of dropping thing. So it's like, hi, ay, 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 ay. Sending the energy down is much better than the sensation of wanting to lift up, because that's where we get a lot of this sort of constriction, is sort of from the lifting and flinching. I used to like look up to the left a little bit when I was singing high notes and kind of crook over to the side, and we'll all have like a tell like that. Um, and so you just want to start to be more aware of it. Notice when it's happening, right? Again, simply it could be like high notes that you're singing. Um, and then start to address it by counterbalancing it, right? Like, hi, ay, 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 ay. I might look in the other direction and down a little bit, just to start to break that sort of muscle memory. These are all sort of ways that we can trick ourselves into it. So that's sort of the idea here. Another one that I forgot to mention is a lot of people will want to squeeze in from here and kind of go like, ya, ya, ya. It's very tempting to want to protect this area when we're feeling vulnerable or anxious, and flex these abs. And we actually need this area to be relatively loose when we're singing. So what you can actually do is gently just sort of massage this area, especially as you're doing like long phrases. So I might do like something where I'm like, when you see how even just tapping that, it changes the sound a lot, right? So you can see why we get so rigid sometimes. And instead, you just have to be able to hang out there. And allow these muscles to stay kind of soft. So I'm testing them to see if they have give. And if they have give, that's actually a good sign, right? So if it's like, and I'm really flexed here, ultimately that starts to cramp our diaphragm and we get sort of less flexible with what we can do with our range. We sometimes push all the air out, or sort of hold our breath, and that will lead to a huge backup of tension a lot of the time. So try to find these sort of fluid motions, right? Even if I'm doing like a long phrase, I'm always thinking about moving towards the end as one interconnected long phrase, right? Rather than like, hi, ya, 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 kind of striking it. It's like, hi, ya, 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 ya. Same thing with sustains. If I'm going like, na, 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 and I'm like really holding that out. The temptation is to want to stay static right on that sustain. It kind of is in the word, right? To be like, na, 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 na. And you're going to start squeezing and it's going to get really, really hard. And you might even kind of start getting really lightheaded. The goal here is again to feel like it's flowing through. Like let's say you're doing holding the count of 8, and you want to think about moving your breath all the way through that count of 8. So it's like, na, 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 na. So the more you think about sort of the full connected integrated thing, the better it is. Another sort of like nugget of wisdom that I got from my old voice teacher in college was that if you're having problems with a high note or any note, check the note before, check the note before, check the note before. And eventually you'll get to just how you are with your presence, uh, and how you're standing and how you're breathing. And those things beget everything else that happens. And sometimes we get in these vicious cycles because we're holding and we're stuck in a tension pattern And then once we're holding like this, it's really hard for us to get breath recovery, for our ability to let go and then start engaging again. So singing is always this sort of back and forth between letting go, relaxing, so the body can fill out, and then the sort of sustain and a little bit of engagement with our lower abdominal muscles. And then letting it go so we can refill again. So if you're really amped up, you're going to find that you actually have trouble with your breath recovery. So you actually have to find moments where you can let go of the muscles, relax, find that sort of default state again, and then come back into a more active sort of posture. So it's this sort of back and forth that we do. And I try to do that in my practice as well, right? I'll start with gentle warm ups with the humming to feel it out. Doing this sort of gentle work, then condition and start to notice if I'm starting to get static just through the process of conditioning my voice by if I'm doing lots of intense exercises, like I'm doing, like na 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 na, and I'm doing that for a while and I'm testing my range. Then I might come back and just try to see if I can sit in a nice, relaxed, neutral posture again with my humming again. So be like, and you might notice that through that process of conditioning that you got more rigid and sort of fixed in place. And so actually going back and becoming aware of that, noting that that was a trigger, right? The fact that you were trying to stretch your range and working through that. And then addressing it by actually sitting in these more relaxed postures. I kind of think of it like yin yoga, right? Where we're in more sort of passive positions, doing drones, gently sort of moving through the range, sirens as well, right? So going like, allowing the voice to crack where it needs to, all of that kind of stuff, make sounds that aren't necessarily as pretty as we want them to be. Allowing the voice to do that is actually really, really helpful to reset and to actually address those places of tension, because you can't do it from that perfect sound that you're trying to go for. Often, a lot of the times, that's where we're holding the tension, is trying to make it exactly how we want it to be. And we have to do a workaround to reset it and then kind of reapproach it from a different angle. So that's why this is so complex, and there's actually a lot to be said, and it does take some time and patience. And again, non-judgment. I mean, we can be aware of what we're doing, but the second you start to associate yourself with it too much and really start to blame yourself is when it gets really, really stuck. And that's where a lot of people will give up. They'll get very, very frustrated. So this is my process again, is awareness, non-judgment, paying attention to triggers. They can be physical, they can be emotional, they can be sometimes that you're just tired and you need to rest. The voice actually goes through rest and recovery phases. So if you've been singing a lot, it's really important, especially if you're like a professional singer and you're doing back-to-back shows, you need to plan in some time where you are resting and not using your voice. The temptation is when our voice is starting to go a little south and getting really tight and worn, is we try to like test it out more and more, right? Like, oh no, it's not working. So let me go through my routine and condition my voice even more. And you're just fatiguing it more. It's like if you've ever like sprained your ankle or had any physical injury, you want to like test it out and be like, okay, I'm going to see where it hurts. Oh, it hurts right there. It's like, no, let it sit and relax and be still while it's recovering and the body's repairing itself, and then come back to gently stretching it. But that can be really, really hard to do. It can be very tempting to want to just test out the voice again and again. There are actual phases where the tissue gets softer, and it's in sort of recovery, again, from lots of excessive singing. And those moments when you have a little bit of a kind of afraid sort of sound, it's starting to be a little bit hoarse. You're feeling that sort of discomfort, maybe sort of slightly swollen feeling in the tongue. It's harder to talk without effort. That's a sign that your voice is in recovery phase. And it literally just means that you need to rest it, and not use it. So again, some of the tension stuff is literally just from that overuse sensation of like, I need to keep trying this until I get it right. And that's why we have to do this in incremental bursts, address a few things for a little bit, particular tension things integrated into your exercises, then put it to rest and let your voice recover and come back to it throughout the day or every other day or however long you need to rest. That's going to help you a lot with managing your tension. In fact, I find a lot of my students will go through this process of like working through, being aware of, okay, your tension point is your head and your neck is coming out instead of your lower abdominal muscles supporting your breath pressure and creating that good subglottal breath pressure. And this is getting stuck like this, and it's affecting the tone, it's making it more harsh. Uh, we're working through that. We're doing exercises to find more back placement, like, going like, like ba ba ba, trying to find that sort of placement. Yeah. And they're trying to do it, maybe overcompensating and getting other kinds of tension. And then I let them stop for a while, right? Maybe they go on vacation, they go on a break, and then they come back after sort of really just detaching and letting themselves sort of recalibrate, sort of set to neutral again. We come back and we do the same cycle again, and all of a sudden they found growth in their voice because they've given themselves that time to decompress. So that's why this is just like being an athlete. You have to know when to condition, when to stop, when to address things, and then when to let that go. So, like, sometimes make my practice a little separate from song work. Like, I will do the practice knowing that I'm kind of working through some of these things. And then I just try to allow the sort of integration phase to happen where I'm just singing and allowing the emotion of the song to take over, and trying to find more of these sort of fluid interconnected phrases as one vowel and consonant sort of flows to the next, as we go from one breath to the next. Often songs are building momentum and energy as the song is developing. And so if you're already in a really tight place, it's hard to allow that to happen. It's sort of like this momentum thing that happens with our breath and with acoustics and all of these kinds of things. So again, we have to sort of coax ourselves into the zone and then sometimes just sort of forget what we did in our practice, allow that to be muscle memory, and just sort of see what happens when we're allowing that all to integrate. So that can be really hard. It's sort of like a weird, like, mental gymnastics, right? Because we have to address things and then we have to purposefully try to forget them. So sometimes it's just time away from a song. Like, let's say you're working on a hard aria or like a really impressive piece, and you get really stuck in a rut with the high note because you start cracking every time. We work on mixing and some other things to address the cracking. Sometimes purposefully crack just to feel what that's like, and then stop and let it go for a bit. Try some other songs, and then try to come back to it with a sort of a reset, refreshed mind and muscle memory. So this game. It's really tricky. A lot of times I'm doing my practice so that I can avoid getting stuck in unhealthy muscle memory patterns. So I really try to prepare myself well in advance before I do certain high notes so that I can have that memory of the high note being effortless and fluid. And the more we get sort of the other side, the more likely we are to sort of fall into it. So if you're like anticipating a hard moment, like this happens with like Oh Holy Night, like I do that sometimes for like a Christmas thing, and it has this really big high note on the top. And if you're like, oh, here it comes, here it comes, get ready, then you're gonna probably crack or kind of choke up on it. But I often just try to find myself present with each note, right? That concept of, if you're having trouble with the high note, check the note before and the note before and the note before, get in the flow of it. And then you realize that the high note passes by. You're not thinking about it as like this singular moment, but as sort of something that comes in culmination of one good breath leading to the next. Really enjoying the easier parts of the song as ways to kind of amplify and build into what's considered the harder part. But a lot of that is just a matter of mentality. Like, high notes don't necessarily have to be uh, as hard as people are making them out to be. It's just sort of a change in state. And often we have plenty of energy And most people can actually build up plenty of pressure to sing high notes. It's actually we tend to overdo it or lock in place or try to do something in excess with our body to make it happen, rather than just sort of trusting your voice and trusting the body. Obviously, learning proper technique and conditioning your voice and being ready for high notes by through a practice is really important. You can't just like, okay, I'm just going to see what happens and go out and try to sing a really high note, lift a 100-pound weight without any sort of prior work and experience. But I'm talking about that singer who's sort of stuck in a rut, and you're sort of getting really fixated on the tension points, and it's making it worse and worse and worse, right? So that's sort of this concept here. Um, it's a little bit heady. I get that. Sometimes we do very particular physical exercises, but the reason I'm sort of talking more in this particular lesson is because you can do exercises all day with the wrong intention, and sometimes it makes it worse if you're not sort of going through this process, right? So awareness, tension points, what are the triggers? Um, how do you address them? So, like, sometimes it's rest, taking a break. Sometimes it's doing some of this massage stuff using your self care tools, doing hums and glides and stretches, working through that kind of a thing. Particular tension points for like if your head and your neck is coming out or your jaw is getting really locked in place or pushing forward. Um, there's all sorts of exercises for this, and we'll go over them in particular and all sorts of these lessons and content that I do. Almost every single one of them is about addressing particular habits that happen. So just know that this is sort of like a central point of like how do you approach, and then you can go through all the other content and get some specific details on what might be happening for you. And if you're not sure, come and take a lesson. That's often a way that we can help you sort of figure out what's out of balance with your voice. It's more that than anything else, right? And it changes from day to day. Like all great voice teachers will tell you that progress with your voice is not as linear as you would like it to be. It sort of balances between different issues. Sometimes we overcompensate because of a previous issue that we had or because of something that a teacher told us back in the day, and it's changed now. And so you have to be able to address all of these different components of your voice, and then find what needs to go into balance, or what's out of balance. And so that's why voice teachers and having check-ins, even if you are a professional singer, having sort of some feedback and mirroring is really important, because you can we can point out certain tension things that are happening, and often when there's like a pattern, and then we go through that process of learning how to break it, and all of a sudden you'll find your range is totally different. It's expanded, just because there's one little thing that's happening, that's blocking everything else. But often, again, when we have like one tension issue, people try to change everything about their voice, and you get all twisted up in a knot. So this is just part of the practice. It's what makes it really, really challenging, but also very rewarding. And when you get it right, you feel like you're floating, and your voice is just effortless and sings itself. So. Um, Hopefully that all makes sense. Do we have any questions? I know there's just a few of you here now, but I've got a few minutes so we can address anything in particular that you might be experiencing. That's always really great with these lessons, and in the future too. Like if you're showing up to these, or maybe you're watching this not at the time that I'm doing it. Come back to one of these and ask me a question about some tension that you might be experiencing. Um, yeah, and that's going to, I can actually in that moment give you maybe some strategies or do some of our feedback things, right? We have, you can submit videos, and then I'll give people specific sort of, or Camille will give you specifics on, uh, what you might try to break through some patterns or certain tension habits that you have. Um, um, so what are you saying here? Any, yeah, so you're asking about why we sort of often a lot of teachers claim that uh, that any person can sing. Um, there are certainly, like in general, yes, but there are certainly some things that make it impossible for the voice to sing, right? When you get like paralysis, nerve damage, there's all sorts of reasons, right? That where we can actually get an inability to speak or phonate. But if you can talk, then you can find a way to sing. And so that's sort of a different approach on it. And it's a matter of what you mean by singing and what sort of capacity as well. It's just like a physical sport. So, like, you can, not everyone necessarily can get to certain levels of like expert singing, but that actually, like, you can get to a place that's where you can accomplish what you want with your musical goals. And certainly it's a matter of time. Like, some people pick this up faster than others, but also it's a matter of just like what I'm talking about here, where we have certain tension habits that can be psychological, they can be physical, there can be all sorts of reasons. Yes, it can be like drugs and alcohol and things like that that can really affect and change the way that your voice is working. And that will affect you, absolutely. So we're not saying that, or at least I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that you can learn, if you can speak, relatively well. You can learn to sing with more efficiency and proficiency, and enjoy singing as a wellness activity, as a pastime. And then, yes, through training and experience, you can often develop professional skills. There are singers who have extraordinary, like, athletic voices that do all sorts of things, and that works for what they're doing with their music. But there's also plenty of famous singers who don't have particularly wide ranges. I'm not going to like shout out names because I don't want to get into any heated battles about that. But there are some singers that, you might think objectively like aren't like incredibly like they're not the Olympics of vocals. They're not doing all the tricks and turnarounds and spins and range jumping and stuff like that. But they write really beautiful music that reaches people, with good lyrics, good songwriting, and they use their voice to express themselves through the capacity that they have. So, as a voice teacher, I'm just trying to help extend what your capacity is. Sometimes we can make incredible breakthroughs. Uh, and ultimately, it's just about sort of using your voice as a medium for your artistic expression. So uh, you can definitely learn to sing. Sometimes, yes, there are physical ailments and issues that make that really, really challenging and can be a setback, 100%. So it's not like that, I guess, what you're saying. Um, and you often can, with a teacher, increase your skill and ability much faster because they can help you break through some of these kinds of barriers that you might be stuck on for a long time and maybe give up on because of that. So yes, there truly are situations where you have like neurological issues and like are actually tone deaf, and that's like kind of a rare situation. So a lot of people will come in and be like, someone told me I'm tone deaf, and it's like tone deafness is more specific than what a lot of people think, and they just need to sort of learn better pitch matching. So when tone deafness often is accompanied with like not really understanding why music happens at all, it's kind of like sounds like pots and pans, or like you might have a very monotone voice. And so there's like tests for that kind of stuff, but it's usually rarer than people think. And yes, there are certain birth defects and things like that that make it very hard to sing uh, how we typically say. So that's just answering a kind of a complex sort of comment that you put out there, which is I think is important to talk about. Um, but you'd be surprised, you can learn to sing. Most people think they can't learn to sing because they think it's just like something you're born with, and that's just 100% not true. In fact, I always say this to someone who sort of claims that, is it's almost like the burden of proof is on you. Like when you say that someone can't learn a physical skill, um, you certainly can learn to some capacity, and sort of what you mean by that obviously has situations of context, but like we can learn physical skills definitely, and singing is one of them. It's just more subtle than people would think. um, so learning to sing, and this is a good sort of closing question. Learning to sing and speaking right or with more efficiency are intricately connected because our speech voice is the same thing that we use for singing. It's just more sustained. sort of longer vowels using more resonance. So the two are connected. Speech pathologists will often help people with certain things that are happening with their speech that will help you actually with efficiency with your voice and vice versa. But I wouldn't say that you have to do that. It's more like it's more of a question of what you mean by that too, because when someone says like I can't speak right, sometimes learning like pronunciation or certain ways to let people have various speech impediments and things like that that are more particular to speech pathology. There's also like certain kinds of conditions that people can get stuck into that sometimes like paradoxical vocal fold closure where like you're trying to speak and it we get kind of stuck or like we start sort of like we have trouble with our breath because of that. So there are certain things that are I would say are out of my skill level because I am not a speech pathologist or an ENT or a medical professional. And so when it comes to those kinds of things, I don't try to like claim in any sort of narcissistic way that I can like fix your problem. I usually am like, this sounds like it's something more medical and requires like actual like imaging or help from a professional with a sort of more physical kind of barriers. But when we're talking about a singing teacher, um, that's yeah. So yes, there are situations where like you need uh you'll need help from like a professional who can work you through that. And often sort of tag teaming with the two, but also a voice teacher does more than just sort of like helping you with certain kinds of tensions. So think of it on like a smaller level from like really serious sort of mechanical issues that can occur. That's more on a medical plane. Voice teacher is somewhere sort of between those two things. And then um, as a speech pathologist is not going to teach you about music theory and about specific things like pitch matching and that kind of stuff. That's where a voice teacher and someone who's trained in music is going to be helpful. So think of like a voice technician as somewhere between those two kinds of things, right? Like you can have someone who doesn't understand the voice who's teaching you how to like coaching you with music in general, like timing and pitch. And then you can have someone who's a technician who understands a little bit more about voice science, who can help you sort of work through certain coordination issues and understanding how the voice works. I'll often do both of those kinds of things. But if I notice that there are certain issues that aren't responding or tension problems, pain and discomfort that's not like benefiting from these kinds of things, then it's like you need to go to a laryngologist, to an ENT, or a speech pathologist and sort out sort of the deeper issues going on. So I really do think that's important, right? Like you don't want to like as a voice teacher, and this is sort of a shout out to other voice teachers, you don't want to try to overly claim certain things. And if there are certain issues that are happening or really acute pain and discomfort, like seek a medical healthcare professional. There's really great websites for this too, or like I often refer people to the Center for Vocal Health is like a really great source that talks about they have like a blog and then you can actually ask questions and things like that. Talks about sort of this divide between the two. So it's more of like a partnership between those two concepts. So yeah, I don't know particularly what you're speaking about with when you're talking about not speaking right. That can mean a whole number of things. So that if that's the case, then I would say yes, you want to consult with a healthcare professional, speech pathologist. I even know voice teachers who have decided to get training in that particular field, and it is related, but more specified in a particular way, right? More towards the healthcare side and less towards like the musical side and like teaching people how to sing their favorite songs and sort of the stylistic components that make up a song, etc. So hopefully that answers that question. These are really, really good, complex questions that you're asking. And it is a red flag if a teacher is claiming that they can fix every single thing about a person's voice because that gets to a medical place. And you often need real data, like you need to get a laryngoscope or something that goes in and takes a picture of your vocal folds as they're moving, or sees that live. so you can see if there are obstructions or other things. And then there are sometimes remedies for those kinds of things, or physical therapy that can help you get to a place where you're singing with enough proficiency, and to actually get to the place of training it with a voice teacher. So, yeah, you're very welcome. I love that. That's a really challenging question. Hopefully, I answered that as best as I can. Um, see, I see people who claim that they don't have musical ears. Um, they can tell if someone can sing beautifully easily and not isn't a sign that they have a musical ear. Yeah. So okay, I'll just stick around for 1 second to talk about this because I see what you're saying there. Um, Beauty and sort of what we take as like music. So there's a refined level of understanding music, but the cool thing about music in general is that we all have an intuitive sense of certain aspects of it. So I always talk about like the physics of it. There, like in every sound that we hear, you actually have the overtone disbursement of all of the musical tones. It's really, really weird if you kind of look into that sort of thing about the harmonic series. Even like a sound of like something like that, like there's a pitch disbursement spectral envelope, and it gives us all an intuitive sense. This is a little bit of my hypothesis, but it gives a sense of tonality, and that we all actually have an intuitive sense of tonality. It's built into how our ears work, and sort of the framework of physics, and sort of how the universe works. And so we can and we listen to a lot of music. So a lot of people, by listening to music, you are training your ear to a certain respect. Maybe not like traditionally as we separate tones as a music teacher or musician, um, but we all have a sense of um, what is beautiful and what we like, and it's a little bit subjective, obviously, when it comes to sort of the nuance of like artistic expressions and things. But I do think we all have a sense of consonance and dissonance that comes naturally from how we perceive sound. Um, and some of it is paradigms and sort of cultural paradigms that we come through. But I think there's actually some sort of primitive sense of it too, which is cool. People always talk about music being a universal language, and so with that, like you could say like I don't have a musical ear, as in like I can't break down what chords are happening and what scale degrees the singer is doing, what mode they're in. Like that comes through training, and sort of like a particular kind of training. Like I can often start to analyze something that way. That's what I think people are referring to when they say a musical ear. Um, but something, what the quality of a beautiful voice is like sort of a little more complex, right? We all have that ability. That's why like music, what's so cool about it is there's sort of this equalizing force. Like I could like break down and analyze things, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's any better than like someone who's just listening to music and having a good experience and having sort of maybe chills, or like that kind of shivery feeling up your spine, or emotionally connecting to the music, right? Like, so this is where it gets complicated. I truly think that a beautiful voice often comes from the freedom and range of expression. So like as your voice is as you're better able to control your voice, and there's more release in tension, you're probably going to be able to create more beautiful sounds. It's complicated, right? This is like a really heady, almost slightly philosophical concept of like what makes a beautiful sound. Um, there are some things that we, as a teacher, like I try to keep track of what, some things that we all generally find are somewhat ugly sounds, or maybe piercing or uncomfortable sounds. Um, that's the interesting thing about art, right? Like visual art sometimes is about having emotional reactions, right? Like some people might think that like rock music or that screaming sound is like a bad sound, right? And then like compared to like a classical pristine sound, but it just depends on the context, right? And so if you're doing something to elicit a certain emotional response, like is that beautiful? What does that mean? Or is it interesting? Does it do something for you or speak a message, right? So it's not always about the beauty, but we sometimes have like a sort of universal senses of like, or like out of certain practices, a sense of what like makes a beautiful sound. Sometimes it's just matching the pitch really well so that all the sounds are more consonant to each other. Um, Sometimes it has to do again with that release of tension to bring this full circle, so that when you can sense discomfort in someone as they're singing, if they have that discomfort, it maybe makes you feel uncomfortable. And so beautiful sounds are often smoother or more effortless. And sometimes when it's locked up, like a tongue gets all the way back, it gets throaty. These kinds of things like sounds like we're choking, and that might make people feel like it's less beautiful. So does that kind of help with that question? Um, to like you can have a musical ear, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are the end all sort of stamp of approval that this is a beautiful sound or this isn't a beautiful sound. Let all people kind of judge that, and you'll see that there are some similarities, but there's also disagreement about what we think makes a beautiful sound. So it's complicated, and so a lot of times as a voice teacher, I'm not so much focused on that as much as trying to help people accomplish their musical goals. And when you feel good as you're performing and singing, that often will turn into something that is successful. And yes, there are some specific things about like matching pitch and things like that. So it's sort of bridging that gap between the two things. But I'm trying to help people break their barriers a lot of the time. So hopefully that answers that question. Really, really good ones. They're very challenging. I love that. Maybe we'll talk about that again at some point in the future about like what makes a beautiful sound. It's a little subjective, and it's maybe a little bit societal, right? They're paradigms that we have about what makes something beautiful, but those things can change. So it's just a matter of like if you're the only one saying it and other people aren't saying it, then maybe that's something to consider. As music is about sort of connecting and reaching other people a lot of the time, so you could kind of be stuck in your own sort of head saying like, oh well, everyone else is wrong and I'm right, and that might be missing the point a bit. So anyways, with that, I think that's plenty for now. We went kind of all very over on this one, but it was a heady day talking about tension, and I think by releasing tension, a path towards a more beautiful and receptive voice. So with that, I will catch you all next week, and we're going to talk about vocal dynamics, which is going to be really cool, much more technical lesson. So stick around for that one, or I'll see you all next week, and we'll go through like mixing and registration and how these things can change the quality and volume of our voice. So I look forward to that one, and I will catch you all next time. All right, take care.